Buenas tardes a todos. Les damos la bienvenida a la conferencia La relevancia del activismo postmoderno en las relaciones públicas en 2021 y en un marco diagnóstico para su análisis, de las cuartas jornadas de Comunicación Estratégica de la Facultad de Ciencias Sociales de la Universidad Nacional de Lomas de Zamora. Mi nombre es Carolina Carbone y estaré a cargo del encuentro de esta tarde. Quiero pedirles que mantengan sus micrófonos apagados durante el tiempo que dure la conferencia. Agradecemos la presencia del decano de la Facultad de Ciencias Sociales, Magíster Gustavo Nahón, así como también la presencia de estudiantes, docentes y funcionarios de la casa e invitados e invitadas de otras organizaciones del país, de Latinoamérica, de España y de Portugal, y de nuestros invitados que están en el Reino Unido. En cuanto a la dinámica de la actividad, la conferencia durará 40 minutos y luego habilitaremos un espacio de preguntas y respuestas. Pueden utilizar el chat para hacer comentarios y consultas. Este evento cuenta con interpretación de inglés-español. Podrán seleccionar el idioma desde el botón de interpretación que se encuentra en el menú inferior a la derecha con el icono del mundo. Dice la palabra interpretación, ¿sí? Al hacer clic allí podrán seleccionar el canal de idioma que prefieran escuchar. Además, en configuración podrán optar por escuchar o no el idioma original. Ahora sí, le cedo la palabra al moderador de la charla. Lo tengo que decir, mi querido amigo Gabriel Sadi. Gabriel es docente e investigador en la University of Huddersfield, Reino Unido, en donde se desempeña desde principios de 2020. Previamente, hasta el 2019, dirigió carreras de relaciones públicas durante 15 años en la Universidad Abierta Interamericana y en la Universidad de El Salvador, y fue profesor de grado y posgrado en otras 4 universidades. En el bienio 2020-2022 se está desempeñando como International Liaison Representative de la Public Relations Division de la International Communication Association y es miembro del Consejo Asesor del Latin American Communication Monitor. Participó entre el 2016 y el 2019 representando a América Latina en el proyecto Global Capability Framework, promovido por la Global Alliance for Public Relations and Communication Management. Es doctor en Comunicación Social por la Universidad Austral de Argentina y magíster en Comunicación e Imagen Institucional por la Universidad KS. Bienvenido, Gabriel.
Bueno, muchas gracias, querida amiga. La verdad que es un gusto. El agradecimiento es muy grande por haberme invitado a tener el placer de moderar, de presentar a una gran colega como es la doctora Derina Holtzhausen. La conferencia que va a dar Derina se intitula, como dijo Carolina, La relevancia del activismo postmoderno en las relaciones públicas en 2021 y un marco diagnóstico para su análisis, en lo que tiene que ver con una breve presentación de nuestra conferencista, de Derina Holtzhausen. Ella es doctora por la Universidad de Johannesburgo, actual profesora y decana del College of Fine Arts and Communications en Lamar University, Estados Unidos. Lamar es una institución miembro del Texas State University System. Derina ejerce la docencia en programas de grado y posgrado en gestión de la comunicación estratégica, gestión de medios e investigación. En Lamar comenzó a trabajar en 2015, luego de desempeñarse durante 7 años como profesora y directora de la School of Media and Strategic Communications en Oklahoma State University, también en Estados Unidos, y de haber estado otros 11 años como directora de estudios de posgrado y coordinadora del programa de Relaciones Públicas en la School of Mass Communications de la University of South Florida, también en Estados Unidos. En su Sudáfrica natal, Derina ejerció durante 25 años como periodista, como socia en una agencia de publicidad y relaciones públicas y como ejecutiva de comunicación tanto en el sector público como en el sector privado. El Institute of Public Relations de los Estados Unidos la reconoció con su premio Pathfinder por su agenda de investigación original sobre relaciones públicas postmodernas, de la que hoy nos va a hablar. Desde que se mudó a los Estados Unidos en 1997, ella ha publicado más de 30 artículos y capítulos de libros. Se desempeñó como coeditora del International Journal of Strategic Communication, de la que también es cofundadora, y publicó un libro galardonado, Relaciones Públicas como Activismo, enfoques postmodernos de la teoría y la práctica, que recomiendo su lectura. Tenemos la fortuna de que ha sido traducido por la editorial WOC al español, y recomiendo especialmente la lectura, por supuesto, completa del libro, pero especialmente del prefacio, del prólogo, en el que Derina, en un estilo autobiográfico, cuenta cómo fue su particular infancia en aquella Sudáfrica tan dura de vivir en materia racial. Ella también es coeditora del Handbook of Strategic Communication, que fue publicado por la editorial Routledge en noviembre de 2014, y coautora de Principles of Strategic Communication, un libro, un manual recién publicado por Routledge hace un par de meses. De modo que, Derina, muchas gracias por esta posibilidad de estar conversando contigo en esta hora por venir. Te cedo la palabra para que comiences, por favor, con tu conferencia, y luego, por supuesto, habrá un ida y vuelta de preguntas y respuestas con alguna de mi parte, pero sobre todo de parte de la audiencia. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very, very much, Gabriel, Dr. Sadi. It is wonderful to be back in Argentina, as I said earlier, even though it's virtual. Your country has a special place in my heart. I think also because of your work in public relations, sorry, and strategic communication. You know, every continent needs a groundbreaking institution to develop the discipline, and in South America, that is obviously Argentina. So I want to thank you all for your involvement and also for reading my book. I appreciate that. If you can get that far, because sometimes now I read it and I said, I wrote that, I'm not sure what I meant myself. But in any case, that is very postmodern. So good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you about postmodern theory at this pivotal moment in the 21st century. Indeed, in the Western world per se, the onslaught on postmodernism and the danger to democracies have never been greater as at this moment. It always amuses me when people want to use the basic ideas of postmodernism, but do not wish to call it as such. They do this for many reasons, but primarily because postmodern is out of fashion and redundant, and they need to come up with the next shining object to justify their research. Or they want to hang on to some preferred ideologies or approaches related to modernism, like always ending up for the desire to have some normative outcome. So, and the ambiguity and instability of postmodernism is too much to bear for most people. As a result, one hears all kinds of terms that wish to retain modernism in some form while expressing it in terms that pretend to not be related to modernism. Next, please. There, great. The manifestations of modernism are not new, but it is worth repeating here, because I believe that the differences between modernism and postmodernism have never been more starkly articulated globally as at this historic moment. At the heart of it, as we see in many countries, from the US to Poland to Turkey, and Western democracies we would never have dreamt of including, there is an overt battle between the tenets of these two philosophies. On the modern side, autocracy's onslaught on democracy, the abuse of power to limit voting rights and bend national institutions to the will of those who fear losing their power, from courts and justice systems to knowledge systems like schools and universities, the marginalization of specific groups of people not only based on race and gender, but on issues such as immigrant status, religion, and many more of the categories modernism has created for subjugation, management, and control. Next, please. All this while, modernists, the proponents of this philosophy, use the dark web, social media, and specific language to thwart social justice and generate misinformation, to spread conspiracy theories, generate mistrust, and cast doubt on anything from elections to vaccinations, climate change, science, and rational thinking in general. Even civility is under attack because of deliberate interpretations of what freedom of speech really means. Instead of postmodernism as a continuation of modernism, I believe a deep rupture between the two sides has developed in many societies. And I cannot speak for Argentina, but I do know what is happening in my own country. Next, please. Oops. Can you see me? Okay. While I say postmodern resistance, as you can see from the slide, which there is, the fact is that we are already living in a postmodern society, and many people would never think of themselves in this way as postmodernists, which is where the modern resistance against changes in society comes from. But just think of how many of your friends, students, and colleagues have accepted and supported social developments. There is a total onslaught aimed at those who publicly support tenets of postmodernism. In many cases, trolls threaten the lives of people who fight for social justice, who support putting limitations to power, support human, animal, and environmental rights, stand for inclusivity, profess universal access to social services and healthcare, require transparency of information in governments and corporations, fight for equal opportunities for all, freedom of knowledge and thought, and resisting the one world hypothesis, as Ermath calls it. In other words, the understanding that there are many viewpoints, not only one, which is what Ermath calls the one world hypothesis. The world works in one certain way, and that is obviously the Anglo-Saxon way of looking at things. The notion of respect for each other, for each other and the other is something that postmodernists stand for, and many of the people that we know. Next, please. I apologize, I'm trying to stay, here you are. But I need to stress again, there is a total onslaught on the notions that support postmodernism. For many, these ideas represent the enemy that threatens everything they have always believed in: the superiority of one race over another, the inferiority of females, the privilege of the rich, the right to their own free speech, but not that of others, the history they have built to legitimate domination, and the superiority of their viewpoints and their very existence. The theories they have created to build a society that only benefits certain people and control work environments, financial markets, economic, judicial, and government institutions, and many more. Next, please. So let us make no mistake. Modernism is winning the discourse wars. Because if you tell people what they want to hear and not the truth, you will win. So these power brokers are shaping the social, political, and historical agenda to their benefit, further marginalizing those who are different from them, using the technologies at hand and defining the language we use because they have built impenetrable systems of power that resist social justice. And I'm going to give you a very simple example that just happened yesterday when it comes to defining language. Last year, there was a protest in a city, a Black Lives Matter protest. And it was not only done by Black people, there were many white people participating, but a young man, age 16 at that time, as far as I know, came from another state and another town with a gun to protect businesses from, in his words, from looters and rioters. It was a legitimate protest. There was no looting, there was no rioting. And in this process, he killed 2 people and hurt another one because he argues that he was attacked. The judge yesterday determined that the prosecution cannot use the word victim in relating to the dead people and the hurt people. He can use the word looters and rioters, but they cannot use the word victims. And this is a very simple example of how those in power shape the discourse in very different and very specific ways to create a set agenda that supports modernism and its powers. Next, please. So more than ever, these trends now truly highlight the role of discourse in shaping our societies. And it is on the acceleration of this phenomenon, driven by easily accessible and pervasive technology and a desire for power, that I wish to focus on today as the most dominant phenomenon of this moment in the 21st century. This also remains for me the most distinct difference between critical theory and postmodern theory. While critical theory often uses social theories in its approach to critique, now more than ever, the concept of discourse and language has become the method to attack postmodernism and its supporters, and really giving credence to those French philosophers who highlighted the discourse and its harms, the harms that it can do to society. Fortunately, they also provided the tools for counterattack and analysis to lay bare the current destructive onslaught of modernism. So let's revisit discourse and its implications for this moment in history. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. First of all language is discourse, but not all discourse is language. Discourse is also shaped through signs and symbols. We know that is not foreign to us. Cultural artifacts such as movies, documentaries, and also institutional practices such as advertising and public relations. The symbolism of events and how we organize and talk about our organizations. And I've added here algorithms. In 2015, I published an article on the role of big data in strategic communication. And in there, I proposed that algorithms is a form of language, just using computer language to express an idea or a notion, and I will get back to that. Next, please. So let me explain. Discourse relates to how meaning and knowledge are structured. From a modernist perspective, meaning and knowledge are fixed. It cannot be changed, and it should not be changed. And it is fixed by a small group of people who directly benefit from the created discourse. When I say small group, I refer to people in positions of knowledge and power, such as the judge I just mentioned, academics who shape history and theory and knowledge, IT people who write algorithms to include certain groups and exclude others. The very purpose of algorithms are to segment and categorize people for strategic purposes, particularly strategic communication. From a postmodern perspective, discourse is unstable. It has no fixed meaning and changes within the context of its use. Thus, discourse has multiple meanings. And I think that most people in this room would accept that there is no one meaning. It depends on how you see it. And Gabriel mentioned the preface to my book. And that was why I did that, to say, here is my experience, my life, and this is where I am, and there is nothing objective in this book that I wrote. It is deeply influenced by who I am as a human being. So if the judge accepted that he would have allowed the use of other terms, academics would have admitted that there are many interpretations to history, and algorithm writers would admit and take into account their biases, then they would have accepted that there are multiple meanings in terms of their practice. For this, to come back to a little bit of theory, for me, never before, like today, Deleuze and Guattari's conceptualization of rhizomatic analysis or rhizomatics is more relevant than now than when they created that, because they had no idea about social media and the ability to create this kind of communication that is facilitated by technology. Rhizomes are underground root-like systems that keep on growing, even if they are cut in half or cut off, or a piece is cut off. They find new ways of spreading and growing. The modernists, they defined the modernist communication as rigid segmentary lines, constructs fixed and normalized identities within various social institutions by way of binary oppositions, and I'll get back to that. Whereas the rhizomes, the postmodern rhizomes allow for segmentary lines, disturbs the linearity and rigidity of meaning, and create cracks in a facade. If the ground might look smooth, but here comes another rhizome. So it also creates lines of flight so that you can have multiple meanings and you can actually propose alternative meanings. Next, please. Right, whom of us do not know this? This is the famous transmission model of communication, which was conceptualized in 1949. It might have worked then and can serve as a model of modernist thinking. These days, the only way this works is when your boss gives you instructions and allows you to respond. That is this kind of a model. It's highly controlled. Your boss tells you something, just as an example. I'm not referring to your dean at all, but or somebody give you a message, expect you to receive it and expect you to give the right feedback, and it goes back, and so it goes around. Now, I really seriously want to plead that we need to stop teaching this model of communication to our students. I don't know if you still do, but I just do not think it is now a historical artifact that is totally redundant. Next, please. There you go. This is the constitutive model of communication. This is a figure from our new book, Principles of Strategic Communication, and where we tried to make this knowledge accessible to introductory, in terms of an introductory course of understanding. So this figure explains how communications flow in the constituted model of communication. Instead of communication in the public sphere as an organized linear model, like the transmission model, the constituted model is non-linear and rather disorganized. Actually, it is completely disorganized. It can be envisioned as a tornado, as you can see, swirling with messages, senders and receivers acting in an indirect, non-sequential manner. The strong arrows represent communication, flow, and dispersion of messages. The smaller black arrows represent the stakeholders participating in the communication process and show how stakeholders interact with each other. If they do at all, the closed circles reflect the end of the communication process in that instance. Through the dispersion process, each stakeholder interprets the original communication in a different way, thus disrupting the linear communication flow suggested in the transmission model of communication. In this way, the original communication is transformed based on the life experiences and perspectives of each individual stakeholder. So you can see in some instances the communication close, in some instances it takes place and then spin off again somewhere else and so forth. So there is no control any longer over communication in the public sphere specifically, is what I'm referring to. Next, please. So once you understand how discourse and language is used in the service of power, you will start recognizing instances of their abuse in your daily lives, and you will start to understand how you can make a difference. So for instance, modernism history is presented as the truth. It has taken place, it is objective, it is there for us to process. And I see, do we still have some time, Gabriel, because I still have a lot to talk about. So let me speed this up. Now, history is being created, alternative history is being created as we speak. I want to use the example of January 6th storming of the Capitol, where an alternative history is created, where the people who stormed the Capitol are heroes and patriots, and not the thugs that they really were. So it is still up in the air which discourse will remain, will prevail. So competing media platforms vie for the dominant narrative, and they use these kinds of histories that to create and for their viewers' consumption, whether it has anything to do with the truth or not. The onslaught on theories that support postmodernism, critical race theory. I don't know if you heard about this in in America is now being banned from being discussed in many schools and in many states. It's even under attack at universities. And the notion of critical race theory is that racial discrimination and gender discrimination are institutionalized. In other words, it's built into the system of this country. And we all know that that is the truth, but they do not want to know that, and they do not want to discuss it. So what they do, they ban it. So the purpose of discourse analysis is to disrupt dominant power relations, to fragment the meaning and lay bare other interpretations, other knowledges, other meanings. It is supposed to not be a voice for others, because that's paternalistic and patronizing, but to create opportunities for the others to voice, thus being emancipatory. I don't know if you ever talk about microaggressions, and those are the little snarks and the little put downs in one's workplace where people say things where they don't realize just how insulting and aggressive those are. So you can be an activist for social justice in your own environment by analyzing discourse. So next, please. There you go. Thank you. Discourse analysis as professional practice. So that's what I wanted to focus on too. It's not only theory, but how can we use this in our work and in your research and in your profession? So I think the first thing is you must understand the discourse to analyze it and create heightened awareness. So let me give you a little example to hang all of this on. Just this week at my institution, there arrived on my desk a job description for a business coordinator. Now I have a business coordinator in my college, but the business division wanted to change the job description and wanted to centralize the power of the business manager or the business coordinator in the business division of the university. Now that is everything that we as academics don't believe in. Business has a role, they must give us our money, we will spend it wisely, but for the rest, stay out of our business. And so that to me was a real postmodern moment. First of all, I immediately understood the discourse of that job description. I understood the concept of centralization versus decentralization, which to me is a much more postmodern approach to organizing. So I went back and I said, listen, you might not have intended it like this, but these are the problems that we have with this position. And obviously, my provost supported me, and I am now rewriting that job description, but from my perspective, from the college's perspective. This is a little example, but it is an example that immediately laid bare what the business division thought where the power was. The power was not in the academic area, the power was in the business area. And I had to resist, and I had quite a few sleepless nights because of that. So, you know, what I'm trying to say is that if you want to do discourse analysis, you must understand what you're talking about so that you can come up with alternative contexts and alternative meanings. Next, please. I'm trying to speed this up, Gabriel. So be an activist. Speak out like I did with this stupid job description. But sometimes things are so crucial that you have to be aware of what it is that is happening here. And I could do that because I understood the language of power and of organization and of organization theory and of organizing. So it is very important that you need to know what you're talking about. Take the outside-in approach. Speak up for the other, and the other with a capital letter. The other are those, the other is, oh, everybody was not in my department or my division. I've also spoken up in this instance for the other deans and saying, listen, this is not going to work for deans to do this way. And the other, of course, are the people who do not have a voice in our organization and who might be affected. So I could challenge the meta-narratives because the meta-narrative of power that was created in this instance, that business trumps academics, and that it was what it was about power, and I could challenge it, and I could change it. So I did not for a moment think, oh, I'm going to leave this place. You know, Lyotard says there is no good place. I stay, and I do not feel I have to leave. And I also have to say that not every moment is a postmodern moment. Not every discourse is about power, and it is most of the time just about the practicalities of our lives and of our work. But be careful when you create your work that you create it in a way that is postmodern, that listens, that interprets, that analyzes, and so on. Next, please. Right, now I come to the diagnostic framework. I'm not doing too poorly, Gabriel, am I, in terms of time? I'm rushing through this just a little bit, but that's fine. I want to give you guys time for question and answers. This diagnostic framework is something that I created already in my PhD in 1995. And I have felt it to be a very, very handy way for analyzing and determining what is wrong and what is important in strategy, in your terms of strategy, but you can use it very handily for your discourse analysis as well. And let me show what I mean. You can see there are 3 levels: macro level, meso level, micro level. They mean exactly what they say. The macro level is the societal level. In other words, those are divided up typically into the social, cultural, legal, political, economic, technological, and physical sectors. And in this instance, in our principles book, I've included the media, because I think for the first time, the media are no longer just a facilitator. It is a real sector that deeply influences everything we do. They call it mediatization of society. In other words, we live in a society that the media created for us, and that where we use the media to create our society. So I've included media in there, and I'm not talking just newspapers. I'm actually, newspapers are pretty much marginalized in this process because they do not necessarily, if they in print, allow for feedback and so on. The next level is the meso level. That is very often ignored. Those are things such as leadership styles, organizational structure. How do we organize our communication function? Do we integrate it, or do we separate it by stakeholders, like they did in a company that I worked for in South Africa? There was somebody for investor relations and somebody for communication, and they were all in different departments. the best way, of course, is to integrate them all. Decision-making styles. Those are some of the organizational level factors that we need to determine what makes our communication processes work. And then the last level is the micro level, communication level. And, you know, I don't know if you have that experience, but when students start on their career path in your classes and so forth, then they want to start with the communication. If you give them a problem, they want to start with the communication. And that is, oh, how's the ad going to look? Or let's do a news release, or let's organize an event. And at this micro level communication is really not what that even refers to. That refers to the environment that you create in terms for the reputation and trust of your organization, the organizational culture, your reputation per se, how you do social responsibility and environmental responsibility, and how you build relationships. So this is a very, very brief, but you have the slides. You can do it, and you can also, the new book, well, this is a hard copy. I forgot, I should have showed this to you, but there is a paperback version too, but it's in English, unfortunately. But that sort of represents much of this as well. Sorry, yeah, I forgot to move those on because I feel in a bit of a hurry. So that is it. Thank you very much. And now I will answer your questions.
Bueno, Derina, la verdad, un gusto, una plataforma muy profunda para el pensamiento, con una serie de cuestiones que son generales, que no son específicas de las relaciones públicas, pero que por supuesto afectan especialmente a las relaciones públicas. Y si me permitís, querría empezar justamente haciendo algún paralelo que lo has trazado al final, por supuesto, entre este marco diagnóstico, esta metodología ligada con el análisis del discurso, de las narrativas, y el campo académico y profesional de las relaciones públicas. Has hablado en un momento de las diferencias entre la teoría crítica y la teoría o el enfoque postmoderno. Y me interesa aplicarlo a las relaciones públicas en cuanto a que yo he estado leyendo en los últimos 15 o 20 años, o quizás 10, críticas muy fuertes a la teoría crítica en materia de relaciones públicas, en cuanto a que académicamente puede ser muy solvente, muy atractiva, cosa que yo en lo particular suscribo, pero que es bastante difícil de aplicar o directamente inaplicable a la práctica profesional cotidiana de las relaciones públicas. Entonces, la pregunta que te hago es doble. Por un lado, ¿coincidís con esta mirada acerca de la posibilidad de aplicar o no la teoría crítica a la práctica de las relaciones públicas? Y en todo caso, para bajar un poquito más, si se quiere, al día a día del profesional, todo este bagaje postmoderno, ¿cómo actuar profesionalmente con un prisma postmoderno en el ejercicio de las relaciones públicas?
Again, I think that to me has always been the benefits of postmodernism. And that is that it is so, and maybe, as Gabriel said in the beginning, the fact that, you know, I lived that life where these factors of power and segmentation and discrimination, all those things were so real in my life. And then we went through a transition to a democracy, and those things became even more real. And we as practitioners had to change those mindsets. For instance, there was an article in one of the journals, in one of the issues of the International Journal of Strategic Communication. In one issue, that we had 3 articles, all relating, and it was so stark how the political system in each on each continent or context affected public relations practice. So for instance, in South Africa, the move switched completely to the stakeholders. It was all about people in the environment, the marginalized, the poor, and because the government became of those people. So it was the, so the practice moved to the outside-in approach. You couldn't go and affect the environment. The environment affected us, and we had to interpret that and adapt our organizations to our environment. In the US, it was very evident that capitalism ruled the roost. That was where the power was in capitalism, was in shareholders, not stakeholders. Now it is, they change it, but I don't really even think they understand it. It was all about money. It was all about business, as my example of this week again shows. And in Europe, my feeling was that it was much more, because they're much more homogeneous in terms of their thinking, not in terms of their race and language and things like that, but that was a much more consensus-based approach to, you know, that symmetrical approach to public relations practice. Where in South Africa, it was clearly asymmetrical and pitched towards the other and the marginalized, and to bring them up and bring them in. And it was a real dissensus. And I wouldn't say there was a real dissensus in America, because people accept capitalism, but the dominance was with business and with capitalism. So just as an example to show you how theory for me informs practice. You know, I always tell my students, theorists aren't mad professors who sit in a dark room and create theories. We create theories based on observation. And I think that is for critical theory the same thing. They just perhaps revert the process a bit too much, where they start with the theory and then try to find the practice, where I think in postmodernism, we start with the practice and then to see how we can explain the phenomenon. And in that sense, we might even use critical theory. You know, I use many aspects of critical theory in my own work. Everything informs us, but I think the emphasis shift from practice to theory rather than theory to practice. And I think that is perhaps the mistake that is being made. For instance, gender, if I can talk about feminism and those kinds of things, that's an excellent theory. There's a strong history of that in public relations, but it started with feminism and then it was applied to practice. Oh, okay, here is feminism. Now let's see. And then so you get the Velvet Ghetto and all those studies. So I think that is one of the major differences, Dr. Sadi, that I see between the two approaches.
Bien, clarísimo, Derina, muchísimas gracias. Tenemos una pregunta de Adrián Arroyo, aquí lo veo, que tiene que ver con el cambio social y se liga con otro pensamiento que yo tenía de un concepto que has hablado, tú, Derina, similar a este del cambio social, que es el de la justicia social, ¿no? En este mundo, evidentemente, para llegar a un estadio de justicia social se necesita alguna instancia de cambio, con lo cual la pregunta de Adrián es, ¿pueden las relaciones públicas ser protagonistas del cambio social? Y la segunda pregunta es, si fuera así, ¿cómo?
I believe PR should be protagonists of social change. I think that's one of our fundamental duties. And the way we can do it is by what I talked about today. It lies in the simple language. It doesn't necessarily lie in the dramatic gesture or the big event or in the, I personally feel that the battle for change is fought in practice on a day-to-day basis. When you stand up and say, you know, respectfully, I disagree, you know. I want to come back to this memo that I sent to my provost. The first one was blistering. I sat here and I just typed and I was so furious. And then I asked the people in my office to comment for me on it. And it was clear that they thought, ooh, that was too much, you know. So I sat down and I worked an extra hour on this and took out all the bad language and, you know, showed respect for the people who designed it. And I said, I do not for a moment think they had any bad intentions. They are concerned about fiscal responsibility, and I understand that, and so on and so on. So my memo that I eventually sent was so different from the one that I wrote, really in anger. And that was very much appreciated. So sometimes it is just those little things that you do, but respectfully. And you know, once I said in a paper, I may write when I started out as an academic, I said, I think it is in the way you communicate, you know. And one young woman suggested that I am saying that women need to use their vials and, you know, their be flirtatious and things like that. That was not at all. All I'm saying is be respectful. And that was again a lesson for me to wait a night before you send an email. So, but you know, so I think it's the day-to-day awareness and practice that's in your bones about being aware of these things that really make the difference.
Gracias, Derina. Tenemos otra pregunta aquí de la audiencia, en este caso de Candela, relacionado con un aspecto fundamental y siempre considerado como el primer paso, ¿no?, en cualquier metodología práctica de las relaciones públicas, y es el diagnóstico. Candela pregunta, ¿cuáles consideras tú que son las herramientas de diagnóstico más importantes para un profesional de las relaciones públicas?
Everything. Everything. You need quantitative data, you need qualitative data, which these are very modernist philosophies, narratives, narrative analysis, which is part of discourse analysis, get people's life stories, understand their viewpoint from their personal experience and not from aggregated stories, from documents, from history, from everything. If you really want to do a very thorough job of, you know, understanding your stakeholders, then you use everything at your disposal to create that complete picture. I've always used all methodologies, always explained and understood the limitations of each. There is no preferential one for me. I tend to go more to the narrative, qualitative kind of things, but I also understand what quantitative data brings to the table. And so you need to understand the methodology too, but each one has benefits. I mean, it just contributes to the whole picture. That is one of the things about postmodernism. It don't privilege one system of knowledge over another. So, you know, in modernism, it's all about the numbers, or certain ways of analyzing your qualitative data, and now even transforming it into quantitative data, you know, and we've done that for ages, that now it's easier. But the fact is that all systems of knowledge are valid, but all have their limitations. And you need to understand and know those.
Gracias nuevamente, Derina. La última pregunta por mi parte. Estamos ya con 5 minutos de tiempo disponible. Y está relacionado con el pasado, pero mirando al futuro. Las relaciones públicas han tenido en buena parte de los últimos 40 años lo que se ha denominado como un paradigma dominante, ¿no? Un paradigma que tú podrías mencionar como un paradigma moderno, ligado con el funcionalismo, con aspectos más cuantitativos, si se quiere. Y las relaciones públicas postmodernas están en la vereda de enfrente. Yo he escrito, me hago cargo de esto, por supuesto, lo he escrito yo después de una investigación que me ha llevado un tiempo, porque ha sido en el marco de mi tesis doctoral, que veo que el futuro de las relaciones públicas tiene que ser ejercido, no solamente, pero sí en buena medida, y protagonizado me refiero, por este abordaje postmoderno. Porque es académicamente muy interesante, pero también le da herramientas al profesional para que pueda ejercer el día a día. Este es mi primer acercamiento al tema del futuro de las relaciones públicas en cuanto a una manifestación así general. Pero la invitada especial del día eres tú, con lo cual me gustaría saber tu opinión acerca de, si se quiere, el futuro paradigmático de las relaciones públicas y el papel del abordaje postmoderno en ese futuro por venir.
Just from a purely, and thank you very much, Dr. Sadi, for recognizing my work in this regard. But just from a purely practical viewpoint, if you look at our societies, and that's what I've been trying to say when I started out, our societies are postmodern. You know, people are asking the questions that 30 years ago nobody mentioned about marginalized groups. My goodness. LGBTQ, you know, gay men were like, oh my gosh, now those categories have expanded and exploded, and people accept them. They live with it. Not everybody, I'm not saying, but the fact is that the trends in society are postmodern, and it is unstoppable, even if the modernists think that they can control it. Because, and that's why I included media in my environmental analysis, my macro level environmental analysis, is because the media have really destroyed everything that has a single meaning. Where do you go to find your single meaning? You go to the one outlet that keeps on telling you the same thing. But if you live in a regular society, you hear alternative meanings and interpretations all over the place. It is unstoppable. There is hardly a way in which you can protect yourself any longer from the fragmentation of our society. And I know people lament it all the time. They said because it was so comfortable and so easy, because we all had the same ideas and we all lived the same lives and had the same dreams. but at the same time, it was for a very, very select group of people. And now the media have given those other groups of people a voice as well. And they're not going to stand back and wait for this group of people who think they're so superior and so smart to just, that's what's happening in our country, in the US. It's happening all over the world, and it really is unstoppable, except if you're China, where you control the internet and you control every message. And I mean, they have really elevated control of messages and propaganda to a totally new level. I mean, they have an app where you get points if you support the ideology, and I mean, it is unbelievable. But that is not the countries that we live in. Even if we are semi-autocratic, you know, those things are really quite unstoppable. So I do not see a return to modernism. I just, not in our societies. Maybe in highly homogeneous societies, absolutely, that is where it's going to take place. But not in the societies that we live and work in. I just don't see it.
Bueno, muy bien, Derina, hemos terminado con la hora programada. La verdad que ha sido un alimento para el espíritu y para la mente, en cualquier orden. Siempre escucharte y leerte es especialmente placentero en ese sentido, porque abre, no cierra, al estilo posmoderno, abre avenidas y calles para transitarlas, ¿sí? Y para repensar algunas prácticas y para repensar si el statu quo, ¿no?, lo establecido, es efectivamente una consecuencia o una causa. La verdad que ha sido un lujo, y permítanme agradecer nuevamente a la presencia tuya, Derina, recordarte que Argentina está, por supuesto, abierta de par en par para que vuelvas con tu familia cuando desees. Ha sido muy, muy recordada tu visita en 2016.
I will be back.
Seguramente, seguramente. Y yo iré contigo, porque también extraño a la Argentina después de estar un año y medio afuera. Podríamos combinar como para hacer así una llegada triunfal por Ezeiza. Pero bueno, en serio, muchísimas gracias. Y por supuesto queda pendiente la posibilidad de seguir conversando.
Thank you for having me. I very much appreciate it. And thank you all for what you are doing in your disciplines and in your classrooms. You've really set the stage, and it is such an important region of the world to fold into our understanding of how people communicate, and you have your own marginalized groups and your own power structures and power struggles, and all of that help us with that, what we call the pastiche of what society is at this moment. So thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
Gracias a ti nuevamente, Derina, y pasamos a Carolina para cerrar la actividad.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Derina, Gabriel. Será un placer guiarlos en Argentina y hacerlos recorrer todos los rincones que podamos. A todo el auditorio, muchas gracias por su presencia. Recuerden que la actividad de las jornadas continúa hoy a las 18 horas con la conferencia Comunicación, Inteligencia Artificial y Nuevos Desafíos, a cargo de María Florencia Sabatini. Podrán ingresar con el mismo enlace que utilizaron para las actividades anteriores. Les deseamos que tengan unas muy buenas tardes.